So how do you price that? A sculpture like this? Well, that's a tough question. Today I'm going to be talking about that, but next week I have a really good video coming out about sculpting hooves, showing you kind of how I do that because hooves are kind of tricky to sculpt. But today I'm going to be talking about a question that was asked in the comments of one of my videos, because this is a really interesting subject and a lot of people get confused about pricing art. They think that people just slap high prices on art, and that's not entirely true. So let's get into that a little bit. Someone recently asked a really good question in the comments of the video I made about this 50-man bronze sculpture. Alexandra Casal commented, "Can I ask how much this piece is worth?" Well, that's a really tough question because this is what we call a one-of-a-kind, and it's a massive sculpture. So I'm going to be talking to you a little bit about pricing art, because there are art prices that are determined by the markets, or the art markets, like auctions and that sort of thing. And then there are prices that the artist myself would set for pieces I create. When I was a kid, this sculpture took Dad and Mom a long time to create. With the help of a couple people in the studio, it took them 4 years just to sculpt, because the entire thing was created by hand. You know, it wasn't machines or computers or anything like this. This was all created life-size by hand in clay. Each one in clay would have weighed hundreds of pounds. In metal, they weigh hundreds of pounds. So that was a massive task. So how do you price something like that? Well, that's not really an easy task, but lucky for me, I use what I call pricing calculations, which I just take into account my time, materials, casting, molding, labor, overhead, all that into account, you know, to price my sculptures. But that's because when I sell something, it's usually direct to a client or through a gallery who may represent me. Now, the art market is a lot different, because you see in the news all these sculptures that go for, you know, like $50 million or upwards of $100 million. Well, I'm going to talk about that here for a few minutes, because it's different when a sculpture goes to an auction and brings these high prices than it would be for me to just sell a sculpture to a client, you know, or something like that. Now, this sculpture was never really intended to be sold. A bank did sell it for $1 million, but that was to the city of Branson, you know, and that was because the bank wasn't able to hold on to the asset, which it got because the museum actually sold the sculpture to the bank in return for some debt during the financial crisis. And then the bank was trying to sell the sculpture, almost had it sold, from what I understand, for a good price, but that deal fell through. They weren't allowed to hold on to the asset, so they had to sell it to the city of Branson to get rid of the asset, because by law, a bank can't hold on to an asset over a certain amount of time, because, you know, that would allow for corruption. If a bank could, you know, foreclose and then just collect all these assets, you know, it just lead to a lot of corruption. So there's laws on that. So $1 million for a sculpture that size is, to me, a very, very low price. That's a steal, because, you know, I couldn't even make something like that for that price. I would owe a lot of money for a lot of years if I tried to create that sculpture by hand for $1 million. You know, it would cost way more than that. So why was all the money spent creating this sculpture? Well, it actually did pay for itself in a way, because it attracted so many thousands of World War II vets and their families to Branson, Missouri, who spent millions of dollars in the local economy. Unfortunately, most of that generation has died off in the past decade or so, because, you know, they'd all be 90 to 100 years old now if they're all left alive. So the sculpture was created to honor those veterans, but it also was created to attract tourists, which it did significantly, and it still does now, especially that it's displayed again in front of the museum. So that being said, today I'm going to talk about, you know, the contemporary art market versus pricing my sculptures individually, because once a sculpture hits that art market, Its price is determined by collectors and dealers and a whole different group of people instead of being determined by the artist. You may recognize Jeff Koons, who is the highest paid sculptor in the world. He's got a net worth of, I believe, over 200 million. Now, Jeff Koons has created huge pieces of abstract art. I know at one time he employed over 100 people in his studio, creating all these massive works of art, with other artists who he paid to help him build those pieces while he directed them and designed them and that sort of thing. And, that's a whole different world than what your typical artist, even your successful artist, will see, because those prices are, some people say they're highly, highly inflated and it's shady and this and that. But, if someone's willing to pay that much for a piece of art, then that's on them. So you can't really get mad at the dealers or the auction houses or the artists for having those high prices. It's worth what another man is willing to pay, is how they put it. Now, when I sell works, I'm not putting them out on that market because I'm a young sculptor. I've sold pieces, but I'm not some famous person and I'm not dead. A lot of people say that you get the highest prices after the artist is dead. That's very true in a way. So I actually take into account how much it costs me to create the piece and how much it'll cost me if I want to produce another one, because I don't want to just, be spinning my wheels and not ever getting anywhere with my career. So I actually have a pricing model to help me determine what the price is going to be for a sculpture once it's all completed and cast in metal. You may also have heard of Damien Hirst, who is the highest paid all-around artist in the world. And what he did is something that will probably never, ever occur again in the history of our universe, because he did something different where he bypassed the dealers and the galleries, and he took a huge amount of massive abstract art pieces and he took them straight to an auction back in, I believe it was 2008. And the pieces went for huge amounts of money, hundreds of millions, somewhere like that, literally hours before Lehman Brothers declared bankruptcy, which kind of signaled the peak of the financial crisis, where many, many people lost everything they had worked for in their entire lives. It was a really rough time for those of you who are too young to remember, understand, or you've forgotten about it. It was very serious, but luckily we all got through it. So, yeah, those are prices that are really determined by a market of dealers and collectors, other than being determined by an artist who just slaps prices on those pieces. That's not what happens. So I just thought it was important to explain that a little bit today. Now, important artworks that you may discuss in an art history class or you see on like the National Geographic channel. I know a lot of people think that they only have inflated values and they're just art. They don't serve any purpose, but really art is the only record we really have of our history dating back thousands and thousands of years ago. There weren't books, there weren't computers, obviously, there weren't scripts, and the manuscripts they do find are extremely rare and they're usually not in very good condition. So these sculptures and paintings are the record of our human history. If there's ever an apocalypse or a meteor strike or a gamma ray burst or some nuclear war or something that just destroys the planet, the sculptures and statues, or even the paintings hidden away deep in the earth inside caves and vaults, those will be the only record of our existence, unless you have like time capsules or something. But that art is how we understand our past. It's a science, and that's why it's important. And in our modern times today, we don't know who the next famous artist will be, or who will be the person who creates art that symbolizes our human history and our existence and our culture. But as artists, we should all try to encrypt these things in our work so that our past can be studied by future generations. I don't know if your pieces will be carried out throughout history or my artwork will be the next famous piece or bring the next high price, but we all certainly need to do our best in the studio. So thanks for watching today. I hope this helped enlighten you a little bit on the pricing of artwork and its importance. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't yet, and please give me a thumbs up by hitting that like button if you enjoyed this video. Check out some of my other videos or my own artwork on my website. Thanks for watching. I will see you all next week.